Comics.
We like
Comics.
We like
Comics.
because they have no home.
Welcome to the after show. Flashback time.
We are leaving the fantasy world of Edenwood and going to the real world because we get to talk about Tony S. Daniel, who is the writer and artist on this book. So his name is actually Antonio Salvador Daniel, and he's an American comic book penciler and writer that's been really active in the industry for the past 2 decades. So he began his career at Image Comics, actually, on various titles such as Spawn and Tomb Raider, while he also began work on his first solo project, The 10th. And The 10th is described as big monsters, beautiful women, and bad guys in a sci-fi setting. So
what more could you want?
I looked it up, and it doesn't look like his style does now. It looked like the kind of 90s style that was popular, like late 90s, early 2000s. He was riffing on what Jim Lee and all those other guys were doing. So it very much fit in with kind of that era of comics where you've got women that have like a giant bosom and like a super tiny waist, and you're looking at it like that doesn't look right, and it's not anatomically possible.
That looks uncomfortable. Like Spider-Woman, where she's like arching her back in a way that would be extremely painful.
It looks very uncomfortable. So he's come a long way in his art style, actually, since then. And that's actually a comment that I found just looking around the internet at various things, especially reviews of Edenwood, right? There were people that were saying like, wow, like his drawing ability has come so far since X point in time or whatever. So that's good to see, at least, that he's definitely been improving in his craft there. But yeah, he started out doing independent work, which is not usually how you break into the industry. The path is normally you get hired at Marvel or DC. Maybe you do something at Dark Horse or one of the smaller publishers, but then they notice you become a big name there. Then you go do the indie thing because now you have an audience and a following, and those books give you back more money. So Edenwood could sell, probably 1/4 of the amount that his Marvel and DC books do, and more of that money goes into his pocket because he published it at Image. So it was still a good choice for him to do that. But he was indie first, but then afterwards he was hired at Marvel to work briefly on X-Force and Gambit fill-in issues. And I think he did like 1 annual for X-Force or something like that, but he really wasn't at Marvel long before he actually went under contract with DC to pencil their Teen Titans book with the rising star writer Jeff Johns, who you might have heard of. So, so that kind of, I think, made him right there. Following his success on Teen Titans with Johns, Daniel was given the main Batman book and worked alongside Grant Morrison there for nearly 4 years. This resulted in one of the most famous runs in Batman history, covering the Batman R.I.P. storyline and Battle for the Cowl, which followed the death of Bruce Wayne in Morrison's Final Crisis event. So yeah, basically the time period where you're looking at Batman's dead and Nightwing has the mantle, Tony S. Daniel was pretty much on the book for that entire era. So kind of a fun moment for him to be penciling that title. And he did actually, I looked it up, he did actually write a few of the issues during that time as well. So it seems like he's kind of always done this thing where he'll write a little bit and then, but he's primarily been a penciler for most of his career. And I think that with the story structure gripes we had, maybe that is something that kind of shows a little bit, is that he's less experienced as a writer. So anyway, after that series ended in like 2009 or 2011 or something like that. In the years since, Daniel has written and penciled Detective Comics, beginning with the New 52's relaunch, Deathstroke, and The Savage Hawkman with artist Philip Tan.
Hawkman!
Yeah, so that was not a successful launch of Hawkman, although the person that took over Tony S. Daniel as his writer duties after issue 8 on that title was Rob Liefeld, of all people. So
another who his work was criticized early in his career.
Yes.
But
Rob Liefeld actually also worked on Deathstroke, I believe. So they had some similar titles that they worked on.
I was gonna say Liefeld didn't necessarily get better. He sort of just embraced his art style and said, "This is my style."
Yes, that's exactly what he did. And it should be mentioned that his Detective Comics run actually got him on the New York Times bestseller list. That was something I forgot to include in the notes, but so that maybe gave him a little more clout as a writer. And his Deathstroke title was actually packed with a 2-scale wearable replica of his design for Slade Wilson's mask, which was sold in Barnes & Noble and other hobby shops. So it was like a big box where you've got the mask visible on one side, and then you've got like the trade on the other.
Oh, I should have done that with Bastille or Jean-Luc's armor.
Oh man, that would have been so cool. Yeah, because he definitely looks cool.
Yeah,
like that's, if nothing else, he looks really cool. But yeah, that was something that if you were there in like the mid 2010s in Barnes and Noble, you'd find probably several of those on the shelf.
That's cool.
His other DC work includes Superman, Wonder Woman with the writer Charles Soule, Justice League, Action Comics, and he did some cover work for Nightwing as well. But really, he's kind of been associated with the Batman titles, which is kind of impressive because usually that's something you have to kind of work your way up to. It seems like he did Teen Titans, and I guess if you're friends with somebody that high in the company, Jeff Johns, that you just get to do what you want. So then he did Batman after that for quite a while. So
well, his penciling style seems like it fits really well with more of like a dark, gritty kind of story versus something, like Metropolis. There's always that comparison of like Gotham is like dark and crime and gritty and kind of old fashioned, whereas Metropolis is like futuristic and clean and bright colors. So
his art really makes sense on titles like Deathstroke and Batman. Like it really does. I mean, if you can imagine all the blood and violence that we had in this, there's a scene where Rion's eyeball is hanging out of its socket. There's actually a moment in the Deathstroke run where Slade had like regrown his eye or something. I forget what happened, but like his eye had come back, and he's so arrogant and so like basically believes so strongly in his ability to kill people better than anyone else that he was like, you know what? I don't need this, and he rips out his own eye in one of the sequences and just like throws it on the ground. So if you can imagine. That, that's the kind of like ultra violence that you would have in the Deathstroke series with Tony S. Daniels. So it still continues the very kind of like bloody, violence that we saw in this story. Although this probably takes it a little bit further than what DC was willing to allow.
Sure. Yeah, he's free to kind of explore that on his own a little bit more.
Yeah, and Image has traditionally never had any kind of censorship, so you don't have swear words blurred out or anything like that. Their whole thing is creator owned, creator freedom. You do whatever you want to do. So after Daniel wrapped up his work, or not wrapped up his work at DC, but he sort of took like a hiatus from doing more than just covers there. He penciled the original series Nocterra at Image with the Batman writer Scott Snyder. And so at this point in time, Scott Snyder had written, I think, all 52 issues of New 52 Batman. And his series was like wildly successful. He introduced the Court of Owls. He took Tony S. Daniels' concept of the Joker with no face, and then he developed it into something really cool. And generally, it's a very well-liked period for that book. So, it kind of makes sense that like these two successful Batman creators, they come together and do a title together at Image. Sure. So that's Nocterra. I don't necessarily know what that's about, except that it's more sci-fi, but I think that they are actually fighting vampires in that as well. So seems to like the kind of supernatural stuff. Yeah. But during the time when they were writing that, Daniel actually came up with the ideas for what would become Edenwood. So according to him, he actually began 3 years before the publication of issue 1 with his broad ideas, which Scott Snyder helped him edit down into more approachable arcs. Which makes me wonder how crazy were the ideas. Yeah. Because this still felt like it was like super packed full of information. And if that was edited down, I can't imagine how much world building and lore he like developed.
Well, and maybe editing it down didn't help in terms of maybe these 5 issues should have been 10 issues.
Yeah.
And then part 2, 10 issues, is where we then get the, story where you just move ahead with everything because now you know who everybody is. Like, I almost wonder if that's where it suffers, is you tried to take something that was way too long to begin with and you pared it down so far that now it's kind of hard to follow because you don't get all the info. Whereas, maybe that should have stayed the way it originally was, but just spread out over more issues.
So kind of like a director's cut of a movie, how it tends to add things in. I know that, obviously Justice League is like the obvious example where there's like 2 hours of footage added back in that make everything
such a different movie
make more sense.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, this actually how they got from point A to point B does make sense. They just cut all that out for some reason. But there's even stuff like the Daredevil director's cut from back in the day where there's like a whole subplot with Matt, doing some courtroom stuff that actually ties back into how he is able to catch the Kingpin. And you're missing all of that in the original movie. So he just kicks him in the knees, and then for some reason the Kingpin is taken down in the original cut, and you're like, what happens? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So
it kind of does.
That's it does, but it was still like, well, okay, cool, he beat him in combat, but what does he have to like pin him with? But in the director's cut, you find out about like this stripper that was murdered by his aide, and there's like all this other background information going on, and Matt had done all the forensics and like legal work on that to figure out how to finger him for that crime, that's how you catch big mob bosses in the real world. That's how they catch them. They don't get them for like murder one, they get them for like tax evasion, and they're like, well, you're going to jail for tax evasion, and it's like, dang it, I didn't get caught for murder, but I got caught for that. So but that's a really good point you bring up. Maybe it needed to be expanded out instead of like condensed more. I was thinking that, maybe he didn't pare it down enough, but maybe you're right. Maybe it was just too much story for the amount of time that we had. I feel like we have that complaint a lot where we're like, this should have been 12 issues, not 6 issues.
It's like, this feels really
the pacing
rushed.
Was,
If you would have taken a little bit more time, then we could have, Maybe that's the thing, is like, you get 5 issues. So tell the story you want to tell. And so you're going to tell as much as you can because you don't want to take the time in case you never get to tell the story because you don't get, 5, 10, 15 more issues.
And I might be wrong about this, but I think this was a Kickstarter that had to have funding in order to get off the ground too. Even though it was published at Image, I don't think their publishers had been like, oh yeah, we're all in on this idea. So I think it was Kickstarted and then published through them. So, it was crowdfunded. So it may be that we need like another Kickstarter to get a continuation of the series, which is a shame. But
so wouldn't want to take time, because if you have to get Kickstarter every time you want to do some issues of this, then you don't want it to drag out for too long.
Exactly. That could be a very long process.
Yeah.
So because the lore established was so dense, Scott Snyder advised him to take your time revealing all the new characters and ideas that you have planned. And
good advice.
It feels like he didn't take that advice, but that is good advice.
That's good advice.
So he also claimed that he got inspiration from his own teenagers, for the voice of the teens early in the story, as well as his time growing up in a rough part of the Midwest where we were a bit meaner, a bit tougher, and a bit more casually hurtful to each other. So the way that they kind of like pick at each other at the beginning was directly from like his childhood experiences of kind of like growing up in a rough neighborhood and stuff. So.
I mean that's a really good point. Like, it's not that the characters were lacking in, maybe development, but they felt like characters. They didn't feel like inconsistent. Who is this? Because they're acting so differently.
Right.
They all seem to have a model and stick with it. So I think that's a point in its favor.
Yeah, that's true. So if you want more information about the development of the story, if you're just interested in that, there's actually a full interview with Daniel at aiptcomics.com. And that's where I got most of this information. So I'm calling it out because I want to credit them, because I, don't want to just copy them. But he explains things down to like the food that they eat, like why they're a 6-eyed fish, why they need pills that are called pegs or something that are supposed to like give them nutrients that have been developed. Like all of that stuff, he actually explains, and he knows the reason for. Also, the trap dimensions that the witches form, like he explains that more in the interview. So if you're interested in that, it is kind of akin to Michael Chabon going on Twitter after Star Trek Picard episodes aired and going, oh yeah, no, see, this thing with Seven totally makes sense because da-da-da-da-da-da, which is what we wrote. And it's like, cool, you didn't show that in the story, though.
How are we supposed to know? Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of a problem. So it's, it really is one of those where you'll benefit from the extra information. And maybe that's what helped me enjoy it a little bit more this time as well, was I had read the interviews and kind of looked into it more. The other interesting thing with Tony S. Daniel outside of comics, he participated in the sci-fi reality show Face Off, in which special effects artists were tasked with creating a new superhero alongside Tony S. Daniel and other DC artists that assisted in the development. So he was still kind of working in an artist capacity, but it was like a reality show where I don't know if people were eliminated or like what went on. So yeah, kind of a cool idea.
That's not what I think of when I think of Face Off, but okay.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I know. It's not what I think of either. Now, you'll note in the notes that there's not a backslash between face and off. And that's how you can tell it's not the name of the movie.
Gotta read the text.
So that's right. Yeah, but I mean, did you have any more like thoughts about his art or the development of the story or anything like that?
Not really. I think I've pretty much covered everything. I mean, I did appreciate though that when you were doing the art for this episode, that felt like this was very much like similar to your style.
Yes.
So like when you started drawing it, I was like, wow, this looks like perfect. Like it looks like you recreated it in your style, and then like with the banana demons,
like demon guys,
yeah. Like I was like, let's see more about this story. Like maybe there's a side quest where either Rion Bastille or even Jean-Luc maybe in the armor gets attacked by demon bananas, because they can shapeshift, right? So maybe they could bananas if they wanted to.
I think that would drastically alter the tone of the story if that were to happen. But it was a lot of fun to draw. And yeah, my guess is that with Tony S. Daniel becoming a professional in like 2001 or so, his influences in art are almost definitely my influences. So because we're about the same age, I was 18 in 2001. So or 19, I guess, the beginning of the year. But so we're kind of contemporaries in that. So yeah, I have a feeling that he probably also grew up looking at a lot of Frank Miller, Rob Liefeld art, even Mark Bagley on Spider-Man and Venom and stuff like that. So you can see where his style kind of developed from. So
you mean Vernon?
Yeah. Oh yeah, Vernon. Oh my gosh, dude! I wore my Venom shirt to work the other day, and there was an old woman. She had to be like 70 at least. And she comes up to me and she's like, I'm going to see a movie today. Well, I'm at Starbucks, and I'm like, okay. And she's like, it's Venom. Let There Be Carnage. What's the name of the new one? End of the Line or something. It's something like that. The Last Dance. That's it. Venom the Last. She's like, I'm going to see Venom the Last Dance. And I was like, all right, enjoy. Like, I'm wearing this shirt, but I realized like I'm not that into the Venom movies, really.
Yeah.
I like the character in comic books. So.
All right. Well, I guess that's a wrap on another show.
I'm surprised that we're really quick at this now. I feel like we're really like boom, boom, boom. This would take us like 3 hours before.
Well, let us know if our pacing is too fast or fast enough in the comments, and we'll get you next time.
It's too much information packed into too short a time period.
I'm trying to close the episode here.
Okay. See you guys later.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
We like
Comics.
we like
Comics.
we like
Comics.
because they have a home.